Hi guys, Natalie here. Back again. A big debate, Devil's debate. I'm here with Andy Slater.
Evening.
Good. Deborah from Man United Women's Supporters Club.
You all right, Nat?
Yeah, and Molly Hudson, writes for the Times. Molly, thanks for coming on.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, we're good. So, the debate today isn't going to be about teams or midfield or defender. It's going to be just, I think, a broad issue that's sort of affecting United fans, but it's affecting a lot of other fans. An article was done by Tom Gary recently about away ends and about how it's time for it in the WSL. And I think Man United fans, I mean, we've been talking about this since we first came in, and we went on trips, and we were saying, not in a horrible way, but we don't want to mix. We want to just be all our fans together. And I think when people message you where you're standing, where you're sitting, and all that kind of stuff, you want to make it as easy as possible for fans to come and support the team, whether that's someone in London who supports Man United or Reading or this. You want them to be able to come and sit with fellow United fans. And if we travel down and we want to sit with them, we want to meet them, we want to talk to them and make it easy for them to support this women's team. But everyone to support their own women's team, whether that's City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Villa, is what it is. So, Andy, I just want to come to you and get your opinion. What do you think about away ends in the women's game? We probably know, but what do you think it is that it will bring, or why it's not been implemented? Just your take, Andy.
I'm used to away ends from the men's game, and it is a different beast there. So while we might want to talk about culture that we're used to, we've got a clean slate to use the good bits and make it what we want it to be. And we, as in football fans in general, and the women's game. But for me, I started watching Man United Women in 2018 when the team reformed. I brought my 3-year-old daughter at the time. So, the games that she came to, sometimes she didn't. And it wasn't a social thing. It was, I'm a United fan, let's see what this is about. And I kept going because I made friends. So nobody who I go watching Man United Women with is somebody I knew before United Women reformed. I know I can go to any game and know at least a dozen people who I can stand and chat with. Now, if I go to an away game and I want to see those people, I don't want to have to turn up and wave across the stand to them and, oh, you're all right. I want to be around them. I'm around them at home games. I want to be around them at away games. So there's the social side of it in that aspect. The other side of it for me is the atmosphere, because the first few games before the noisy ones kind of got together, we'd sit and we'd watch, and you'd remember songs from the men's team, and you'd think, I wonder if anybody here knows them, and it was like theatre. It wasn't football. It was theatre. You were there watching an event rather than being part of it. And when you can sing songs, when you can get an atmosphere going, it makes you feel part of it. It's engaging, and that's what people want from football. And like I say, you've got a clean slate. You don't have to bring all the men's culture in. You can just bring the good bits and then create culture of our own.
Yeah, Deb, I mean, when you hear Andy speak, and it brings back some memories, I will say, but it is that kind of thing, isn't it? We all came together and we've made this fan base, and now people wanting to join all the time. And it is, in a way, we know each other. We can text, we can tweet, we can whatever. I can pick up the phone and speak to you or Andy whenever I want, kind of thing, and we can arrange it like that. But if someone is coming in fresh but sees it, but wants to, like what you said, Andy, be in that kind of thing, and God, the amount of people we meet and make friends, they say, oh, I spoke to you on Twitter one time, and I'm like, oh, right, okay, mate, it just makes sense for me when I'm looking at it from my perspective, though. But I mean, what do you think, Deb? Listening to that.
I think Andy has said it so perfectly. For me, again, come over from the men's game, I just accept it as part of the way we watch football. But I think beyond that, I don't want to sit with fans of the other team, not because I don't like them, not because they're horrible people. Nothing to do. I don't know them to know that kind. just I want to be with my own. And that's because I feel more comfortable cheering my team on with fellow United fans. And I don't want, it's as simple as, if the other team scores, I don't want to be listening to that. I don't want to be in the middle of that. So I wouldn't expect them to want to be in the middle of us if we score. So I think there's a comfort level. But yeah, you're right, Nat, that there's so many people that have said, I wanted to be with you. The number of requests we get, the number of messages, you get them personally, Nat. We get them through the supporters club. We've had them tonight. Where are you sitting for the Villa game? And what we almost end up doing is creating a section. As recently as Reading, we created a 4-row block. It became scuppered because they then sold the rows behind it, which we hadn't expected at the time. But people want to be with their own. But we also acknowledge that there are people who go to the games who don't mind where they sit. And that's absolutely fine. And whenever we've had conversations with United, with wider organisations, we've always said a home section, an away section, but also we're happy for a mixed section. We don't have an issue with that. We're not saying it's home or away. And some people, everybody goes to football for different reasons. Some people go because they like the social element. Personally, I want to support my team. And that's maybe my difference. But I think you've got to be prepared to listen to what people want in order to grow. And I know there's logistic issues, but for me, I think you've got to listen to what people are asking for. And we know full well there's a lot of United fans who wouldn't consider sitting with fans of another team.
100%. Molly, I just want to, suppose, bring you in. You probably know that this is how United fans feel. But, I mean, we were talking just before, we were talking about, you saw something that Villa and Birmingham, how they've not got segregation, but now there's a big push for it. And, I mean, you've been part of women's football longer than us three. What do you think? Do you see a massive change since United have come in? Or is it a feeling that's always been there, but now maybe the voices are louder?
Yeah, I think there is a bit more of a demand for it probably since United have come in. I think initially there was probably more kind of that group that Deb mentioned there where they kind of go to the game and mix and it's very friendly. And I suppose it kind of started off because there weren't many fans at games. So almost in the way that Andy was saying, you go and you see the same people. You went and you saw the same people regardless of the team you were playing sometimes because they were women's football fans. And then I think as kind of club rivalry has grown, obviously there's been more and more fans that travel, for example, away fans. You wouldn't have had the demand there. Maybe there'd be people that watched, let's say, Chelsea at home, but how many of those fans would actually go to an away game? So I think that is something that's changed massively. And I think it is something that I see a lot of teams, because you were saying there that you've had, requests for fans that want to sit kind of where they want to sit. And, you see the same for Chelsea and for all these other teams where it's like you're having to organise it yourself because the clubs kind of aren't doing it. And I understand, there's constraints with kind of what stands are going to be open, all this sort of thing. But as you say, if you kind of sell it as blocks or you sell it as rows, it kind of feels like there's a way around it to kind of suit everyone, I think, that probably hasn't been found yet, I think. And whether that's because clubs aren't really aware or whether they're just choosing not to, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I just want to sort of, I suppose, talk about the before Man United as well, because I know, like what you said, you used to go to a game and you see the same faces. And I just want to talk about, I go to Sheffield, I go to Villa sometimes, and that's through people that I know at those clubs. But I see the same faces at Villa, and then I saw the same face at a Sheffield game that I did at a Villa away game. And it's just, like you say, those people. And I still love that kind of thing. I still love that kind of thing. I went to the other day, Birmingham versus Leicester, and they said, which end do you want to go in? And I was like, oh, wow. But I thought to myself, I don't want to go in an end. I just here to see, I like Rambo, I like Jess. I don't care. I chose Leicester in the end, but it was no neither, it was no, people are like, oh, you shouldn't have had to choose but there was no neither with that choice. It was just, I went in there and I cheered for Birmingham and no one did it, and I just think
it's not like if you rocked up as a neutral fan of the men's game and you cheered when a goal went in and you kind of get stick for it from the other. It's not really like that in the women's game anyway, is it?
No, not at all. And I just want to touch on a point that Deb says. So, anyone jumping after this, sitting in a block and then you're surrounded and you don't want to be surrounded. And it reminded me of the Reading game. I don't really know what happened. I think we just picked our rows. And next minute, we was in the middle of all these Reading fans. And there was no Miva, there was no nothing. But we stood up and celebrated hard when Leah scored. And then they celebrated just as hard, turn around. And I'm with Deb. I didn't want to be in the middle of it. Don't mind it being to the side or the left. It's always going to happen, But it was just more a case of being surrounded and feeling that it wasn't uncomfortable, but it was sort of as if you didn't have that security because they were coming from everywhere in a way. And obviously, we celebrated hard, they celebrated hard, good. But when you are surrounded by your people, you do feel more safe, whether that's a natural feeling, And I mean, Deb, you were at that game. I just want to talk. What did you feel? Because it wasn't a nice feeling. Obviously, it's never nice if someone else scores, but it's different to say when we got beat by Chelsea because you knew they were all the way in the corner, say.
Yeah, I think part of the issue with the Reading game was that they opened up the ground in terms of the seats that were available, similar to what they'd had during the season. And then what's happened is, because what we'd done is effectively in the stand, they had sort of the last 10 rows blacked out. You couldn't select them. So we'd said between ourselves, right, we'll have the 4 rows down from that. And then at least we've got a section at the back. If we stand up, we're not causing anybody an obstruction. What's then happened is, and one of the stewards said to me, normally we get 500. We're expecting 1,200 today. And she actually said to me, that's probably your lot. So what had happened was they then ended up selling the seats that previously weren't available. Now, had we known this when we booked our seats, obviously we'd have either hung on, or if they were available, we'd have taken the back. And that was why before the match started, some of us moved right to the back and said, look, if we're going to have to enforce our own section, we're going right to the back. We're not causing anybody any disruption if we're standing up. But again, we are on our own. We are taking ourselves out of what could be, okay, there's not a massive rivalry with Reading, but you don't want to be in that position where you're celebrating next to a Reading fan or vice versa. They're celebrating in front of you. So we naturally just said, you know what, we're going to move ourselves to the back.
And also there's so many new people coming in as well. Like, what if you turn up to say, West Ham, as United fans, you're with some West Ham fans, and there's some new West Ham fans that haven't been to the women's game before, and they're giving it like they would in the men's game. You don't want to be surrounded by that because it only takes a tiny little thing to then spark tension, doesn't it? Like we don't know. We just sort of assume that everyone's going to be nice and friendly. At some point, people might not be, because and that's not like that football friends aren't friendly, but do you know what I mean? That banter that's kind of there in the men's game, it is coming over, it is crossing over, and you don't want this to be the case. When it does, you want to kind of be ready for that, and I get that's hard to preempt for clubs, but I think that's what we need to try and do so that we're not in that situation, because you know what will happen. It'll happen once, it'll become a bad news story, won't it? And then fans will look bad.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose, Andy, what do you think? Because like you said, I didn't feel comfortable in that situation. Whether that's, people might say, oh, Natalie, what do you mean? You're kind of big and bougie and you shout and you'll scream. Of course I will. But like you said, it only takes one person, maybe at a City match or a Liverpool match, there's a big rivalry, to say one little thing, and then it will boot off, because it'll escalate, and you don't want someone to, like you say, maybe say, I know I don't want to preempt what comment, but you know what comments would round up United fans, and you know what kind of thing. You don't want people to go, oh, well, they were asking for it because that's the way they are and they bring things on. Well, no, we support like this because I can't support anywhere else. I can't stop. I mean, Deb will know I can't stop myself from shouting at a ref. It's going to happen. So, can't stop myself from shouting at anyone. So, but then you want to be able to feel secure in that. And like what Molly says, I think they need to preempt it. But in women's football, I find that they don't preempt a lot of things. I mean, Andy, what's your take?
Well, what Molly just said about somebody coming over from the men's game who's gone, maybe it's a big game, they've decided they'll give it a go, and they're used to what is normal at men's football. And at that City game at the Academy Stadium, they sold some United tickets and then they didn't sell any more, so United fans were spread about. Now I managed to shuffle my way around to the United section, but I saw at that game, at the end of the game, there were people turning to the United section, giving certain hand gestures, and it's ironic because there are things that have happened in United City games or not happened that have caused massive complaints from City fans, and then we're there and seeing this action that you think, I've seen that before. It doesn't bother me, but do they know where they are? Because there are certain ways of saying that's not how we do it here. There's a very unwelcome way of saying you're not welcome, don't bring your ideas. But then there's a positive way of saying let's not bring that side of the culture. And that is a tame example of what Molly suggested, where somebody who's it's not an uncommon hand gesture at a men's football game.
Yeah.
And these few lads were probably doing that thinking it's football. Nobody cares about this. And you look at it and you think, if we were doing that at this game.
I love it. But Molly, I just want to come to you, I suppose, because you're press, but you do press for women and you do press for men, and you do both and you switch between them a lot. So what are the good things of the men's game that you would like to see in more? Because I think a lot of women's fans will say, oh, this is the women's game and we don't want it to be like the men's game. And I can see why they say that, because like you said, I won't be able to go around and speak to half the people that I did if it was like the men's game, of course. But there are still good things about men's football. And I feel like men's football is often, when you're speaking up to women, is often sort of like, oh, no. But I'm finding that a lot of people are men's fans as well, and they do support both clubs. And, what's the good things that you see in the men's game that you think can be brought over? And then I suppose what you don't want to see.
I think we have to be really careful. And Andy said it there, that you have the kind of future to pick the good things, the bad things. And I think that's a problem women's football. Well, I say it's a problem. It's a decision women's football has got to make across the board, because it's not just about fans. It's the future of clubs. You look at what's happened to Chelsea with Roman Abramovich. Do we turn the women's game into something where the more you pay, the better you get? The person that invests the most money. Because if you do, you're going to end up in the same situation. And I think that's what's kind of difficult, is how do we get that balance between making it almost as similar enough to men's football to get those fans that we want, because ultimately we want to get more bums on seats. But how do we do that without just becoming a replica of the men's game and getting all of the abuse and the money issues and everything else that comes with it? And I think it's not really a question that anyone knows the answer to be honest. I think it's something that, I remember sitting at, it must be 3, 4, 5 years ago now, we was talking about officials in the women's game. And I remember Baroness Sue Campbell was talking about the fact that we shouldn't shout at officials because it's the women's game. Well, it's the same game, isn't it? I don't know. I struggle with that. So I think it's really difficult. I think just going to a men's game, I think it's just that atmosphere that you feel. And I think ultimately you can get that in the women's game when there's a lot of fans there, or when there's loud fans there. but you don't always get it. And I think, as someone that ultimately is a women's football fan, I want to see that in the women's game because I want to see it for the players. Like, I want those players to feel appreciated. And I want them not to play in front of empty seats and all of this sort of stuff. We want them to be appreciated as professional footballers. And I think it's hard because I think we will get some of the bad stuff. And I think there's nothing you can do about it. I don't see how we stop that. And I think the only reason we've stopped it at the moment is because a lot of those people, and there are some pretty unpleasant people, let's be honest, that go to men's matches, or men's football matches, not just men, women as well, is because they're also the same sort of people that go, oh, don't care about women's football's crap, get back in the kitchen or whatever, right? But, at some point, there might be a crossover of people that do decide to give the women's game a go because it's so much more mainstream now. You can watch it on TV. So, I don't know, I think you are going to get a bit of it. I think we talked about at the start that, what did it used to be like? Well, already this is a change, and I think it's only going to change more as the women's game grows and we get more and more fans. And I think we just have to try and, I don't know, it's hard because as a woman, sometimes I feel uncomfortable at a men's football ground. Like if I'm often, Nat, you kind of do your game and then you see us all sat in the press box doing the post-match stuff. And then you leave, and that's you're talking about an hour and a half after a game. So if that's a night game, you're talking about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And I find it quite uncomfortable, getting the tube home because you're with a bunch of men's football fans that are pissed, that are rowdy, that are singing not very nice things. And I'm someone that's grew up around football, and I'm one of the lads. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't bother me, but I can also see why that atmosphere would put some people off, especially as Andy said, if you've got young kids or things like that we know that the women's game's good for. And I think that's where maybe we have to try and do what we said at the beginning of having that mixed section, and then you're still not losing that, and then you're still having home and away, and that maybe is what we can do different to the men's game. I know they have family stands, but really they're all much of a muchness, aren't they? But if we could kind of do something like that, maybe that's the way to kind of get the mix of both.
Deborah, what Molly said, what you said is spot on. I think that there are people who are actively standing in the way of, say, an away end because they just don't want any kind of anything slightly outrageous to happen. But like what Andy says, we're seeing it already. So then you in a way, you're leaving yourself open to things happening, to incidents just occurring naturally. Only just this season, I've seen a lot more people talking about things being thrown, this happening, that happening, people saying nasty things.
Big one as well, homophobia. That's a big one that you hear all the time at men's football. And if those fans start coming over, it needs to be made clear that that's not acceptable here. And I think there was one, and I say it was alleged because I wasn't at the game and I obviously didn't hear it, but I think it was at West Ham or something. And it's you realise there are gay players and bisexual players in your team. Do you actually realise that? And I don't even know if they realise that. But I think that's the problem, isn't it? How do you educate those people?
It's a Chelsea song, isn't it? I think they've sang it at Chelsea thing, and I think it's a well-known song that you would, not that you do hear when away fans go to Chelsea, even Spurs. There's and there's talk that there's going to be an away end for Spurs and Spurs Arsenal. Are some of the Arsenal fans going to sing things at Spurs fans? It's all those kind of things. Deb, you come in whenever, but there's incidences when we've been on away trips, and because we're wearing United stuff, there's Liverpool fans that are going to a men's game, and then there's trouble there. And I just think because people sort of think, oh, women's fans, things like that aren't. I'm not saying there should be, big, but people don't anticipate or think or that kind of thing, because they don't expect women to these women's fans to travel. And I think the fact that there is now, just by even if they do it all the same, just by ticking a box, it should be something that acknowledges that, fans are traveling now, fans are going, this game is growing. And, I just want to bring in Deb, because, you talk more than myself to like you say, United, different organisations. What do you feel? What do you feel? The vibe's changed or not? Or yes?
I think there's a lot of resistance. I think there's a massive amount of resistance. And I think part of that resistance, and Molly may correct me at this point, but I think people are very protective of the women's game. And there's a lot of people that feel incredibly invested in it because they've watched it grow. And as is natural, when you've been part of nurturing something, you can become quite reluctant to let it go. But there's a point now where the game has the capacity to grow and grow and grow. And it's one of the elements that may stifle it. And I'm one of those people that says, let it go. Let it be as big as it can. It's not going to be as big as men's football anytime soon. Maybe it will never reach that point. But let's not keep it the way it was, because that's how. Now, how many times have we heard the phrase, that's just how it is in the women's game? 100%. And we've come across, you mentioned there, we've been in service stations, and we've been called things that no United fan wants to be called by Liverpool supporters. And that's the kind of thing that gets said at an actual men's game. But to hear it in a service station, it just felt wrong, and it took a lot of It took a lot of restraint from you, I know, to walk away from that, and all credit to you. But I think that there's resistance because people feel so invested in it, and I get that, and people who have nurtured it deserve credit for it. But we were at Reading that we celebrated our first goal, we cheered. Reading equalised. There was a gentleman of an age, about 10 rows in front of us, who turned back to us, and there was a hand gesture. And I remember thinking, what on earth is that about? There's no great rivalry with Reading. You've just taken offence at the fact we celebrated, and that's different. A lot of people, we know now, we've rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. We can say that. But that doesn't make us bad people. That's the way we support our team. And I think that because it was different from the norm, there was criticism. But as we've often said, people are coming round to some of these ideas we had. Not saying we're right on everything, but if you carry on, look, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If you do exactly what you've been doing for the last 5 years, nothing will change. There's got to be a point, I believe, where you just take the reins off slightly. And while still keeping the joy of the women's game that's not the men's game, just let it grow a bit. Yeah. Because I've never hidden the fact I've got a season ticket for the men and the women. And I love going to the men, but I also love going to the women. And I don't want the two to be the same, because I really enjoy the difference sometimes. But I'd love to see more people go to women's games. I'd love to see that grow. I'd love to get a full bus like that and not think about, we're going to get enough people on it. I'd love to be able to say, right, that block's sold out for season tickets.
Do you know what? That's a question I have for you guys, because like my editors will say to me all the time, and I have to write about it all the time, and that's just the way it is. Why attendance is not very good. As people that have bought into the men's and the women's team, why aren't other people? What is it that? And I don't know who I'm asking that to.
Andy, you go.
I think if I gave up my season ticket for Old Trafford in 2017, I had a season without live football, and then the women reformed in 2018. Now, the reasons for that were, what they are, about my relationship with the club rather than the team. But then when the women started up again, for me, it was, this is close to my house. This is live football. This is my team. This is football players wearing my shirt, and it's accessible. But if I was still going to the men at that point, I'm not sure if I'd have had the capacity to go to another set of games. So I think, obviously, Nat and Deb have both got season tickets for Old Trafford and LSB. But not everybody can manage having, you know, I remember from having my season ticket to Old Trafford, if my wife said, "Oh, we've been invited to this on such a date," the first thing you do is check the fixture list. I'm at United that day. To do that with 2 sets of games as well, it's a big ask. And I think that's probably the biggest blocker on existing men's football fans who do go to games from also going to women's football games. I think there's some of it is attitude as well. It's not as good, or it's a long way to go for not very much. There's a lot of attitude about women's football. Ignorance, basically. A lot of the attitude side of it is blatant ignorance without any actual valid view on it. But then there are some practical reasons as well. I think it's a pretty saturated market when you think of match goers. People who can't go to men's football, it's an opportunity to go. I think that isn't being tapped into. If you've got men's waiting lists, which I think some season ticket waiting lists are a myth at times, but if there are people on waiting lists, if there are members, give those people incentives to go to women's football. Make it cheaper, and it's not expensive, but make it cheaper. Make it easy for those people to go to women's football.
I just want to touch. I'm slightly different from Andy in that I was probably an ignorant person. I'm not going to sit here and say I've loved women's football since whenever. I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't really interested. It wasn't a bit of me. But I started to, a men's football fan said to me, "Well, you've got to go this. We've got to do it, Natalie." So I just said, yeah, okay, gave it a go. And there was just something about it. I can't even put my finger on what it is. I mean, maybe but I loved it. And I went to the first 3 games, and I wanted to go to more. I kept wanting to go to more. And at that point, I did have my season ticket with the men, and we were doing it side by side. And I was picking and choosing. And I think there was one game where we had Arsenal at home, but I knew because it was Arsenal at home, the girls weren't going to get that support. So I chose to go to the girls. And then there was times when I was in Paris and I just made it back for the girls. And then I think the biggest one for me is I got a ticket for Barcelona that year after they beat Paris, when Rashford scored that penalty. And I got my ticket. It was all planned. I was starting to plan a trip. And I don't know if they changed it or if it was originally planned. I don't know. But they put the Villa game and I wouldn't have been able to go. So I could have watched Man United in Barcelona. This is the moment that I suppose every Man United fan lives for. Or I could have watched this team that I hadn't missed a game for, really, maybe the first 2. And they were going to get, win the league, get promoted kind of thing. And I knew they were going to win it no matter what. But I chose to go to the girls just because I just knew that, like you say, Molly, I think what you said about you want the bigger stadiums and you want it full. Not for me. It doesn't affect me. If anything, it'll probably work against us a bit. You won't get to speak to things. You won't do this. You won't get your pictures. You won't get that. But I want it for them. I want them to feel the same raw, the same passion, the same energy that they feel when they go thing. So I had to go to watch them because I had to just do it. And, then COVID happened and all this. And I've still got a membership, but I've not got a season ticket as much. But that's because as well, the women's, it's just taken me now. It's taken me over. So it can take someone like me. It can take people. But I know people that have said, I ain't going to this game because so-and-so, when I went last time and we were singing songs, and then they've got these people moaning on Twitter after, and I do think we need to sort of move away from, we need to bring in the best things about it. As long as you're not swearing and calling someone and this and that, bring in this kind of rival, bring in that kind of thing. And the fact that we had all this resistance, I know people who put off from being told these Man United fans are abusive, because it's not abuse to go and like you say, shout at a ref, or I mean, God, half the decisions we were at that game when Honor scored and the ball was halfway across the line, didn't even realise at the time, celebrating thingy. But then you look back at it and you think, are you okay? You know, Zellen's handball. How is this possible? And I just think things like that put people off. But as well, just the fact that, yeah, we're all mixed together. Like Deb says, people don't want to sit with City fans. And that's not any horrible thing, but it's just, this is my culture. This is what I'm used to. So why are we stopping people from doing what they want? And like you say, a block, if there's just one side open, at least have that block so you know that you're with your people. Whereas I feel like even, you know, the Manchester derby, it was sort of tricks are played and they didn't sell it fully because whether they didn't want the full United end, I don't know. And then there was Birmingham didn't sell the tickets to Villa fans. So these things have been going on, not just for our fans, but they're going on for other fans. And it's a shame that, you know, fan groups are having to organise it themselves. It's a shame that I'm getting 20 messages, Deborah getting, you know, we shouldn't be doing it. It should be FA and the clubs making it easy for people, but I don't think they do. And I feel like that's what's holding it back, because it's not like that incentive, that encouragement. Encourage your members to go. Encourage people on the waiting list to go, because United, there is a bit of a waiting list, not as big as they make out, but there is a waiting list for a season ticket. So if you don't get it, right, well, come to thing. And then I think, well, this is going on a different point, but the stadium being far away, put on a bus to get there. These kind of little things. And it's like, oh, we won't do it until we get more people. Oh, we won't do it. No, you've got to do it to get the more people. It just, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Deborah, when you listen to all this and we're talking, and I know we did talk about the resistance. I mean, what do you think? What do you think can be done more, better? I suppose from our clubs, but from other clubs?
I think that the advantage United have in some ways is that we were late to the party, as people like to remind us on a regular basis. But it also means that we come in without some of the ingrained ideas. And we've certainly found through discussions with our ticketing guys that we find they're quite engaging and willing to push things. And all those phrases of that's not how it's done, we don't get that internally. We get it externally. And in terms of why it's not growing, I go back to the fact that some people don't want it to grow. It's not in their interests, because to them, women's football is, as long as I get we talked about this, as long as I get my selfies and my autographs, that's fine. If these girls are playing in men's stadia, that ain't going to happen. So I think on some level, there's resistance from people already in the game because they like that contact. I've always said, I want these girls to be paid big wages because they deserve it. I want them to be selling out these crowds because they deserve it. But going back to the point about why are crowds suffering, I think for us, geographically, the stadium is not easy to get to. And it's something that we've mentioned countless times. The club are aware of this. But I think there's also a terrible snobbery about women's football. Now, I'll admit, like you, I had very little, if any, interest in women's football. The FA Cup final always used to be on, and I'd watch it. And as a casual observer, I knew some of the players, I knew names, but I didn't say, "Oh, I must watch the women's FA Cup final." But when we announced the team, when we reformed, I wasn't, "Oh yeah, I've got to go to this." It was actually my husband that said, "Should we get season tickets?" Because cheap as chips compared to what we were paying for the men. And yeah, very quickly, we both became pretty obsessed. And we loved the fact that we could go with family members as well. So it became easier in that way. Normally, the only way I could go with family is if one of us didn't use our ticket for Old Trafford and somebody else came with us. So there was a different atmosphere and we liked it. And that first season, if any United fans sat through that first season and didn't fall in love with them, then I don't know what you'd have needed. It was easy. And that's not being disrespectful. We were the pro team in that league and it showed. Let's be blunt on that one. But I think there's a terrible snobbery, and I know the people around me at Old Trafford, they have zero interest in the women's team. And they'll often say to me, because they know we go, "Oh, how do the women go on?" Or, "Oh, I saw the women were on the other day." But that's it. It's a passing interest. And I think for me, it's a Manchester United team now. And I view them the same way as I view the 18s, the 23s on the boys' side, the 21s on the girls' side. It's a Manchester United team and I support them. And I don't see the difference. Some people do. They see one team. They see the men's senior team. They don't see the junior teams. And I think that's a mentality that, unfortunately, whether Chelsea have found this, I don't know, Arsenal, City, when the team wins, people will become interested. But we're way off that right now. But having said that, you look at some of their crowds, and they're not suggesting that that's a correlation. I suspect it might help with United, but I think we've got geographical issues. That's a big one for us. I think the interest is there, but I don't think we are bringing over any new fans from the men's side anymore. I think we're establishing new fans. Or not how do I put this? We're not bringing Old Trafford fans over. We're bringing men's fans who don't go to many games, or we're bringing in new United fans. For me, I feel the initial shift we had, that was your Old Trafford core.
How do you manage now then, Deb, both? Because, I mean, you do it more nowadays than me. Both.
There are splits. There are times, and next season's going to be a nightmare because the men won't get Champions League, so they'll be playing Sunday, Thursday. So there'll be more clashes with the women's and the men's team. I guess we're fortunate because Mark and I have tickets, season tickets. So we split. It happened, the Reading game. There was no way we could get back from Reading to Old Trafford in time for the 5:30 kickoff against Spurs. Mark will go to Old Trafford. I'll go to the women.
But you pick the women, though. That's what I know. I'm sorry. I know I'm picking on you, but I do find I don't
He says that. He says that. Look, I think the first. This isn't meant as a puff my chest out moment. I think in terms of, if I want to be the chair of this supporters club, it looks pretty poor if I go and loz off to Old Trafford.
Yeah.
So,
but you do. We've done it from before. We have gone to Devs. We have gone. I think you'd be picking it over me. I think you'd be like me, Deb.
It was, I remember I was going to get out of work really late. I think it's parents' evening that night. And I thought, do I want to be going around Old Trafford at sort of half an hour before kickoff? Or it was easier to get to the Devs. Maybe at times, let's face it, it's not always the easiest watch sometimes at Old Trafford. Not that it's ever made me reject a game, but it's a consideration sometimes. But I know I get that thrown at me, but I think for me, it's less of a thought process. It's more of I go to the women. And next season, I know that's going to be the case a lot more, that we've got to really work that one out.
Yeah. Andy, I just want to touch on, what I'm coming to, your football culture, football fan culture, something that is prevalent in the men's game, but we're starting to see it a bit more in the women's game, fanzines. And I suppose I want to touch on Molly's opinion on it, because it is media. It might be fan media, but it's media, and Molly's media. So, Andy, just talk to us about why you wanted to do a fanzine, what you think that's going to bring, how you think that's going to help, and sort of, because I was never a big fanzine person in the men's game, but, what is it about fanzines for you, that reminds you or makes sure that you like about it?
Well, I think a final point on what we've been talking about to lead into this is about culture in general, and people talk about this is the culture. You can't do that because this is the culture. Well, culture isn't what you decide. Culture is what you do, and it changes. And we are the clubs can have their impact, the league can have the impact, but as far as what football fan culture is, that's governed by the fans, and us and fans of other clubs can shape that now by working together outside of the 90 minutes, by not, picking fights that don't need to be had, by welcoming new fans of your own club and of other clubs. I love that Chelsea bring a following to LSV. They sing songs. I loved that in the last derby at LSV, City resembled football fans. They had songs. It wasn't just banging a drum and shouting City. They had songs. They reacted to the game. They reacted to us. And it wasn't nice because they battered us, but it felt like football, and you want that relationship with your local rivals. Yeah, we dislike them in a football sense, but in a fan base sense, we want a positive relationship that says they are doing what we would do, we are doing what they would do. We'd act like this if we won. I don't like that they're acting like it, but it's only because they've won. It's not because we don't like them or they don't like us. So culture is what you do, not what you decide. And what I've done is, like you say, fanzines are probably less common, but common in the men's game. United had 3 a long time ago. Then they had 2. Red Issue disappeared. I wrote a couple of things for Red News when I went to Old Trafford regular, and it was the first time I thought about it. I thought, I'll write something, and if it's good enough, they'll put it in. And I wrote it, and I emailed Barney, who was the editor of Red News, and he said, thanks for that. Yeah, that'll go in. And it was like, wow, they want it. And it's because it's fan opinion. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be qualified. You don't have to be eloquent even. You just have to have an opinion and present it in a way that people might read. And I loved that it went in there, and I loved buying that copy and seeing my words in there that would get sold around Old Trafford. I loved, some of the match day sounds that stick in my mind. Before we used to stand up at Old Trafford, when we were on the attack, people would start standing up and you'd hear all the seats hit the back, and it sounded like thunder sweeping across the stands. There's the turnstiles when people used to be squeezing in last minute, and you hear that clunk, click, 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 and that was like, we're at football now. And it was outside the ground. New Red Issue out today. Red News, latest issue. And that was like, you're approaching the ground and you hear that, and it was always part of match day for me. And I loved reading it. I loved reading kind of uncensored opinion. It wasn't club approved stuff. It was what real people really thought. So I was always a fan of fanzines. And then in the women's game, there's a demand for content. There's a demand for online content. There are YouTube channels that pop up. There are podcasts. There are blogs. And then in the main media, there's, you speak to some journalists who aren't allowed to write what they want to write because they're only given certain amount of time on certain subjects. So there's a demand for content. And I thought, if I could find somebody who can do the graphics, because I can't, without that, it's just a bunch of Google Docs sitting there unread. But if I could find somebody to do that, and I can afford the upfront printing costs, why not? So I did it. I did issue 1. It sold enough to fund issue 2. So we did issue 2. And that's what's happened. It just funds itself from that initial small investment. And people want to read it. And when people become aware of it, people want to contribute. Sometimes I see people tweeting, and I think they're making a bit of sense. They've got more than just a knee-jerk 280 characters. And I'll engage them and say, do you fancy contributing to this? And people seem surprised to be invited, but excited to contribute to something. And it's not huge numbers, but it's, that first game that they go on sale, I sell a lot. People come to it. People come to me. People come to where I stand at LSV, specifically for the fanzine. They might come and say, is there a new one out yet, if they're not following on Twitter? So people get excited. So it's great to have the interaction. It's not about numbers. It's not about how many people click like on this, or how sensational can this sound. It can't be knee-jerk, because by the time I've printed it, it's a week between finishing the file and getting the print. So it's not current news. It's got to be stuff that lasts. It's got to be things that matter, because I only do it once every 3 months, once every 2 months. So it's got to be stuff that's well thought out and lasts, not just a quick passing thought. So I feel like that gives it a bit more credibility in that it's articles rather than a quick opinion here and there, because it's got to last like that. And I'm finding a lot of people react well to it. A lot of people wait for the next one to come out. And we've got an issue coming out for the Old Trafford game, but the last issue, we got an interview with Casey Stoney. I couldn't believe it, but we got it, and it was great to have that kind of engagement to give almost a direct line to the fans as a goodbye. it wasn't through any third-party media. It was a fan-made magazine, a message to the fans that she didn't get to do because her last game was behind closed doors. So yeah, that's what I love about it. That's why I brought it together, and that's what it is. And you've contributed. We showcase the supporters club at times, try and get a message out for them. And anybody who wants to contribute can.
I just want to come to Mal. What's your more mainstream media, Molly, in a way, and I saw you laughing when Andy said about journalists, they only get a certain amount of words. But what do you think of fan media, your YouTube, this? Because there are more fans now. There is that more demand for content. Yeah, it might not be the men's numbers and, thousands of likes and retweets, but there are, people raising topics, equal FA Cup, these kind of things, and they're coming up, away ends that we've just talked about. But, I do think in written it is, like what Andy says, has to be long lasting. I mean, I do write in it, Andy, but it's more just reactions to under 21 games because, I want them to I suppose get their little moment in the sun. What's your view, Molly, of I suppose fan media, not just the written stuff, but podcasts, etc.
Yeah, I think it's important because ultimately it just gets more people talking about it, doesn't it? And I think that's it comes back to what we were saying earlier. We want the players to see those seats full. And I think the more we talk about it, the more, whether it's things to read, whether it's things to watch, like this channel, whatever it is drawing people into the game. And I think, I think it is hard that, I suppose, particularly in women's football, there are people that were fans and were basically media, were proper media in a way, because there wasn't mainstream media. People like me weren't around 5-10 years ago. So I think there is a transition now where those fans don't get access anymore because now we're here and, I've said to Nat before, we struggle with access, let alone kind of anyone else. So I think there will be more and more kind of blogs and things pop up because fans will still want that outlet and still want to write about, or make videos or whatever about the women's game. And I think it can only be a good thing. And, someone like Casey being receptive to that probably reflects the fact that when she was a player, she was a player through that period where there weren't much media interest. And I think, she's a good example of someone that actually deals really well with the media. And she is, I hear from people in the US, she's the same over there as well. So yeah, I think it's a huge positive thing, and hopefully it just means more people get involved and maybe go to games. I think I suppose it'll be interesting to see whether the Old Trafford game gets a bit more crossover or not. But yeah, I think it's certainly a positive thing, and it's a place to put your opinion, isn't it? And I suppose it's a little bit more nuance and those 280 characters on Twitter where we can all wind people up with 280 characters because you don't really get the whole story or the whole point of what someone's trying to say.
I think it's a bit more nuanced as well, that it's I'm not saying but it's different, isn't it, in the women's game, whereas you, Susie, etc., you'll go to every game. So when you come and watch a Man United game, you just see that one game, but you don't have the
background.
I mean, yeah.
It's we always say, like, I don't know if you know him, but Tim Stillman with Arsenal, like, I can interview however many Arsenal players I want. Like this week, we're doing something with Tobin Heath ahead of the Champions League, but I won't have the insight into Arsenal the same way that Tim does, because Tim goes to every single press conference that's Arsenal and every single game. We just can't do that because it's physically impossible to be in 12 places at once. So that's the part that at the minute, if you can have, and I suppose Tim is quite a unique case of being a media organisation and a fan. In Arseblog, they actually get accreditation. But I think that's almost perfect for Arsenal fans. Quite often he delivers stuff that Arsenal fans want way more than we do, because we, as you say, just come for the big Arsenal games. And I suppose even more so, United, Arsenal, Chelsea, City, let's be fair, pretty much every week, if I do a women's game, and I'm the worst for it because this weekend I was at Spurs West Ham men, so I wasn't at any games. But if I'm at a women's game, then it's going to be one of the big four teams. So then that's where fan media becomes even more important if you're, say, a Birmingham fan or a Villa fan, because the majority of us at a national newspaper, even the ones that do women's football full time, the handful of people that there are, we were having this conversation earlier on, trying to look at the press conferences for tomorrow. I think there's like 5 press conferences in the space of an hour, and you just can't be on everything. It's physically impossible. So I think that's where fan media has that kind of opinion and analysis. I know that like Tim does stats pieces, and I'm sure it's similar for you guys, that you can have that when you've watched every single game and you kind of listen to every single bit of content that you can get your hands on from Mark Skinner and things like that. You will pick up things that we don't, because we just don't physically are able to do that for every single club.
I mean, some people say, regional. I know there's now, I think he's called Jamie, who's going to do it, and hopefully he'll come on this show. But, Jamie from 90 Minutes, I think he's starting to do that more, because then you can look back. I think if you look at United, we've dropped points and we've lost 11 points from, last 10 minutes. And that's like a piece in itself. And he actually did it, like, straight away after the West Ham game. And, then there's this piece about, from, I can't even remember his name, Abdul, who sort of said, well, if they did this formation and started going into tactics, stuff I don't know about. But, there is that kind of thing. But there is that demand there for United, I suppose. More people talk about that. More people, you can say, click on it. But then you could say Birmingham, Leicester, who talks about these as much. And it is that kind of thing, not... And then even if you look even further down, who talks about the Championship? And if you look at that and their results this week...
The problem we have is that, like we always say, there's the teams at the top, basically the top 4, and then there's the teams at the bottom that are interesting because they're at the bottom. But then what about the teams in the middle? In a way, they're more forgotten than, you bet. I can guarantee I've written more about Birmingham and Leicester this season than I have, say, Reading. Just never write about Reading because they're just in the middle. They're kind of not. They're not interesting enough to be good, but not interesting or not bad enough, I suppose, to fear being relegated. So I think there is a balance there, and we are aware of that. That is something that we struggle with, and I suppose United is a favourite in that sense because it's United, and we're doing all right.
Well, I think even when I think Liverpool come up, I think they're going to get a bit of coverage because it's Liverpool and they've got a big fan base, and it's Liverpool, isn't it? So it is sort of kind of one of those things, isn't it, where there's no right or wrong answer, but it's about balancing it and doing all those things. But I just want to come back to one thing. Deb, Old Trafford, can you see more people coming over? Because I think I can see this being not saying a watershed and they're all going to come over and we're going to fill LSV, but I can see the people coming. I can see us retaining it maybe more than, say, any other game. Or do you think no?
Right. I mean, that's always been the big issue with these games, hasn't it? The drop-off in the game that immediately follows. What may help us is we play the following weekend at home. So it's not as if somebody would look at the fixture list and go, oh, they're not playing for 3 weeks. Right, I've forgotten now.
But is that when the men are away? Because I suppose the problem you'll have is that Old Trafford are having this game and it's going to be great. And even if you get loads of fans, it's the international break. So they're not having to make that decision, are they?
Right. And I guess the advantage then we've got the following weekend is that there's no clash. So the women won't play at the same time. I think the men are 5:30 on the Saturday against Leicester. The women are 12 o'clock against Brighton. So maybe that will be a factor that helps. I think we need a lot of people who drive to make that journey to LSV. I keep coming back to that because I do think I've heard so many people say we would go to more games if. The only thing I can say is if the performance is good, you're more likely to get people going, yeah, I want to see those girls play again. Obviously, if the result goes well for us, that's more likely to keep people interested. I think for some it will be their first experience of the women's team. And I suppose the question is, what are you going for if you're going for a cheap day out at Old Trafford, you could have gone to the Cup quarter and semi for free. So I think the majority of people, if they're going, there will be some intrigue about this team, and it's whether that sustains beyond just this one gimmicky match at Old Trafford. Nat, we've always been quite critical of matches in men's stadia because we didn't think it actually achieved much. And you look at the drop-offs in the games that followed, and certainly that's been the case. We know there's going to be a drop-off, but let's also try and retain a lot of those people. I hope there is. I really hope that there is a lot of people that hang on and come to another game this season. We've got 2 more games at home after this one. So I'll always be dubious because we've seen it go with other teams, and we're struggling to get people into LSV naturally who want to go to women's games. So I just hope that there's more beyond. I know I sound a bit defeatist, but hopefully I'm surprised. I'd love to see it.
100%. Mal, Andy, anything you want to add? Where do you want to see women's football going? If you had to say magic ball 5 years' time, where do you see it? Mal, go.
I think I would like to see England win a major tournament, and I think that would do. And here we are talking about club country again, aren't we? But I think it would make a big difference. I think for me, one of my biggest fears is we go into the summer, we've got this huge opportunity. Home Euros, it's not just the fact that England are in a major tournament, it's the fact that it's on the doorstep and you're actually going to get a chance to see these players pretty cheap. Tickets are decent, reasonably priced, and then we lose in the quarterfinals, because we're going to play Spain or Germany. So I'd like to think that we win that tournament, and that's a big thing because we have seen whether or not it does tail off, yes, but I think there is definitely more sustained interest off the back of big tournaments. So I'd like to see that. And then I suppose, it comes down to, the future of the women's game is very uncertain in a sense of who is going to take over the league, because, we know that the FA are keen to kind of move it on. And it's just about who takes over. And I think that will play a big part in maybe what we do see, because say the Premier League come and take it over, which I'm not saying they're going to, but say they did, would that encourage more away fans and home fans because it'd be promoted better, and then you'd end up with more of a crossover? And would the Premier League obviously would want to prevent clashes because they wouldn't want anything affecting those attendances. So I think it kind of, there's a lot in the women's game that is kind of TBC almost. It kind of depends what's going to happen. But yeah, I think ultimately what all of us want, whoever we support, whether we're media, fans or anything, ultimately we want more people through the turnstiles. We want more people in the stadiums, and we want the players to kind of feel more respected, feel that love. And then also that obviously comes back down to their pay and things like that, because the more people that watch it, the less of an argument there is that women don't deserve these, whether it's payment or facilities or whatever. If we can get people through the door, we don't have to have that argument.
100%. Deb, 5 years, where do you see it?
I know Molly's talked about England. Obviously, we're more club over country. I think what Molly mentioned about who takes over the league is going to be a massive, massive factor. It will grow. The game will grow. That's inevitable at this stage. How much it grows, I don't yet know. To an extent, it feels as if post-COVID, it's sort of stagnated slightly. And I think, we're still waiting on the fan-led review. We're still waiting on the outcomes of that for the women's game. And I know that there were some real conflicts, without saying too much, there were some real conflicts in terms of what people wanted. So I think it's in danger of stagnating, but it will grow because whoever takes over the league will inject something into it. I'm just hesitant as to how much it will grow, because you've also got the fan-led review that may or may not work in conjunction with that.
And Andy, 5 years.
I want to see, outside of the rivalry, I want to see fans support fans. I want to see cooperation in wanting away ends, but not segregation as such. For support for what benefits fans in general. So cooperation between fans in that sense. I want to see United in the Champions League, and I want loads of people to buy my fanzine.
United in the Champions League, Euro always. That's all I want to see, and then we'll move on from there and away ends. But thanks, guys. Thank you for these wonderful people for joining us. Definitely like, share, subscribe. Listen on your local podcast platforms. We've got more things coming up this week, so stay tuned. See you soon.